Hello there and welcome to a brand new Digital Foundry video discussing a brand new display technology. Extremely exciting stuff, G-Sync Pulsar. It's not often you can say that something is a genuine game changer, but this definitely is. And we're not talking about opinion here, we're talking about informed opinion here. John Linneman, you've been using the panel for several weeks now. And pretty phenomenal stuff. So tell us more about what's going on here.
That's correct, Rich. So I have spent nearly a month with this now. And what if I told you that you could finally get proper CRT-like motion clarity, almost, with G-Sync, without any visible flicker, and increased brightness rather than decreased brightness? That's what we're talking about.
I'd say that is indeed a game changer because, basically there's been a whole problem with flat panel displays pretty much since the year dot, since they arrived, where the quality of them is obviously highly variable, but pretty much in all cases, when you actually have movement, turns into a bit of a blurry mess. And in this regard, it's a huge downgrade from what we actually had, at the turn of the century and even before that. So the concept that G-Sync Pulsar could address this and to do it with VRR and to do it without dimming is pretty game-changing stuff, I think.
Yeah, so let's get into the details. So the first thing, what have I been doing with this monitor? So obviously I'm running lots of tests, playing lots of games on here, and when you look at all the reviews for a monitor like this, usually, and the marketing, everybody's like, oh man, this is the ultimate esports display, and they're showing stuff like Valorant running and all this, and I'm like, this is much more than that. This can apply to all sorts of games, especially games with a lot of lateral motion. So in my case, I jumped right onto pixel art platform games, overhead strategy games, things where the camera is moving around a lot, and you really instantly see the difference there. And it's not just like a test for your monitor, it's actually real world perception. When you move the screen now, every pixel remains completely crisp regardless of the frame rate. Perhaps the largest benefit, though, is that you can achieve this pristine motion clarity without the need for super high frame rates. We've basically been in this war of frames for a while, and part of this is not just about more responsive gameplay, it's about solving problems with the display itself, and more frames essentially improves motion clarity. But with G-Sync Pulsar, if you're playing at 120 FPS, it actually looks perceptibly similar to now 360 frames per second. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Let's get into this. Why does this matter? To really understand it, we've got to go back. You mentioned CRTs, right? And those were, due to the way they work, essentially you get an electron gun in the tube firing out against a phosphor-coated screen, glass. And with the way it draws the screen from the top left corner down to the bottom right, sort of sweeping across the phosphors, when they're activated, they're only visible for a short period of time. They're pulsed on and then they decay, pulsed on, decay. It's this sort of lack of persistence that specifically works with the way our eyes function that allows it to appear free of any motion blur. There was still a limitation, of course, given the time frame. They had fixed refresh rates. So if you were running, you could set it to 60, 85, 120, whatever hertz your monitor supported, but that was it. And that's how displays were for a long time. After this, though, we got LCDs that started to increase in popularity, and the big problem there was slow response times. That's what everybody was talking about. So you get heavy blurring, trailing. It didn't look good. Plasma TVs were closer, but they still had their own artifacts. But over time, this improved a lot, and LCDs actually started to get pretty quick response times. But even when you eliminate response time blur, such as the case with an OLED display, you're still stuck with sample and hold blur. And this is essentially eye tracking blur, where the image hits the screen, the pixel updates, and it remains constant throughout that entire refresh cycle. And as a result, your eyes naturally create a blur as things move across the screen. And this is something that persists for basically all types of flat panel displays. But there have been some solutions in the past. So one of the earliest things was backlight strobing. And I think this actually initially came out of research done for 3D glasses. And out of that was born this idea of, what if you turn off the backlight for a certain period of time between refreshes to eliminate sample and hold blur, and it actually worked. But of course, it was limited to fixed refresh rates, and because you're flickering the full backlight on and off, you would actually get visible flicker. And of course, you're also reducing light output, so it's dimmer. It's the same with OLED, where OLED pixels can turn all the way on and off. There's no backlight, so that's where the black frame insertion concept comes from, where you're literally inserting like a black frame. You're blanking out the pixels for X amount of time per refresh, and that achieves the same thing. But of course, again, no VRR. And that's where Pulsar differs, and this is why it's so interesting, is that this now uses more of a rolling scan backlight, broken up into horizontal segments across the screen. The monitor can turn off each segment individually, and it sort of rolls down the screen, similar to a CRT in terms of behavior. I actually tried to film this. It looks like if you have a very high frame rate camera, you can actually see the screen roll like a CRT, which is really interesting. The way it works is essentially the frame is pulsed for 25% of the draw time on the image, and this is where you get the 4x boost in clarity. Which means, according to the documentation, 250 frames per second in Pulsar perceptibly looks like 1,000 frames per second. And 1,000 is a key number, as this has been stated by Blurbusters as like sort of the magic number for overcoming persistence blur. But it's just as effective at much lower frame rates, and this is why you actually get into what I said earlier, where 120 FPS can look like 360 or more. And this is kind of the magic moment for me, where I realized that 120 frames per second perceptually looks very similar to the full 360 frames per second that this monitor supports. There is a difference, but it's very, very subtle.
Okay, so I've got a question about that. I mean, is it actually the case that we're talking about the perceptual impacts of motion clarity as opposed to fluidity?
Correct.
Are you saying that yeah, so, 360 frames per second, for example, will still be smoother than 120, but in terms of actual motion clarity, the actual quality of the image will look more like 360. So it's not actually smoother, but
you're right. There is a slight increase in fluidity from the higher frame rate, but it is not nearly as impactful as it usually is because of the motion clarity. Which as a result, like, I actually found it difficult to tell the difference perceptually between 120 and 360 on this monitor specifically. That's how much this benefits. It shows that it's not just the more frames that was really the issue. It was the motion clarity that necessitated more frames, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Right, next question. Obviously, Nvidia has just announced dynamic frame generation, where you could essentially dial in your sort of peak frame rate. And I'm curious as to, obviously, we don't have hands-on knowledge of that at the moment, but I'm curious what you think the impact of using that new technology in combination with Pulsar would be. Is it going to be like a net win, or is it just not needed?
I think it's needed up to a point, and it's going to depend on the software that you're using. More frames is certainly a better solution. Adding more frames, if you can get them for the cost of frame generation, is not a bad thing. But there's still a lot of games that are very demanding, even on something like a 5090, that would necessitate more generated frames. Like, I played through Indiana Jones again recently over the holiday break, and I played it with the path tracing mode. It's very demanding. Even a 5090 without frame generation, you're about 60 FPS, right? But you throw on frame gen, and all of a sudden you're able to massively increase that. Playing it on the Pulsar monitor, it's just, there's a level of fluidity and crispness to everything there that I genuinely haven't seen on a non-CRT display before.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
It really is like mind-blowing in that regard. So
something else we sort of need to talk about is that during the testing period, there was a bit of controversy, a limitation that was in place with the Pulsar display that you weren't particularly happy about. And I think both yourself and Mark from Blurbusters made representations to Nvidia to get this addressed.
Yes, so this is actually a key feature. In its current state, the monitors as they shipped have an option within their own UI, which allows you to change the minimum rate at which Pulsar functions. In this case, currently it's 75 frames per second. Nvidia was concerned with flicker because currently it is down to 75. There is zero noticeable flicker, I would say. As they roll down the screen, they actually have an additional compensation pulse where each segment of the LCD backlight is pulsed a second time to compensate for the variable frame rate. And there's also variable overdrive on this, which is how they're able to get VRR to function in conjunction with the backlight pulsing. And as a result, this actually manages to solve the flicker problem, but they were still worried about it below 75. We've actually seen that this can work at lower refresh rates and be very effective. And the reason you would want that is that, frankly, there's still a lot of content on the PC today that is limited to 60 hertz, right? And when you're rendering at a lower overall frame rate, that actually massively amplifies the issues of persistence blur. And that means so games like, whether it's retro game emulation, stuff like MAME, which can have all kinds of weird refresh rates, which is very good for Pulsar, by the way, or just older PC games, and even some modern games, indie games especially, they're notorious for this. Fighting games as well, where they just don't support above 60 frames per second. So on this display, right now, you are still limited to just normal LCD sample and hold blur. Not great.
Right.
But I sort of begged Nvidia to like reconsider this. Like, guys, this is really, really important. And I was contacted and spoke with Mark from Blurbusters as well, who also has a history of working with companies like Nvidia. And in fact, and he had apparently been trying to do the same thing. So he actually put together one last proposal to them, and they actually decided to go for it. And this is extremely important, I think. And this is actually interesting. So original G-Sync monitors used like a special G-Sync module, right?
Yeah.
And then that was sort of transitioned away from. NVIDIA is actually working with MediaTek to use more general controllers for this software that drives Pulsar. And now you're able to update it very easily just using USB. So firmware updates for the monitor are easy to implement, and that's great because they are planning to update it very soon, and they're actually lowering the floor down to 48 hertz, which is amazing. And it's based on the work that was done that Blurbusters has demonstrated, I believe, and we've seen it working with an older ViewSonic monitor, the XT2431, which until this point was the best LCD monitor on the market for motion clarity at these lower refresh rates. It's actually the first monitor to receive the version 2.0 of the Blurbusters approved certification. And now NVIDIA is allowing this to go even further. And we're getting down to 48 hertz, which is interesting. 48 is great because that means with double strobing, we'll actually even be able to show filmed content, like 24 hertz content will display on there since it perfectly doubles up to 48. And PAL content, so 50 hertz, is covered by this as well. So basically with Pulsar, now we have full support for high-end PC games along any frame rate with VRR, but now it's also going to introduce support for low frame rate content, which means that this will become the most flexible display ever made for handling all range of content and delivering near perfect motion clarity, which
is fantastic.
It's just something I have been wanting for decades now. It has never existed like this before. And that is why it's so darn important, I think, to this.
Yeah. At the moment, it is 1440p displays, 27-inch. I think all of the existing displays that are out now that you can buy are using that. I guess that's kind of like the sweet spot for most PC gamers based on, the way things are at the moment, but it's probably not ideal for people like us. So is there any sort of movement there on actually taking this technology and doing different screens? Can it work with OLED? Lots of questions there.
Sure, yeah. So I actually spoke with NVIDIA about this, and so the technology is extremely adaptable to other sizes and panel types. They're simply launching with 27-inch 1440p monitors, as even though I do like my monitors big, they are right. The average user in getting into PC games, 27 inch is basically the sweet spot right now. And 1440p is a resolution that is easy enough to drive, but still sharp enough. So it is a very nice middle ground. I do understand why that is the focus here. Not only can this be adapted to other screen sizes, but the backlight density, the number of strips used to pull this off, could also vary as well. I would love to see it. It sounds like it would actually be possible, even as like having every single scan line be its own backlight section, where it's able to go per scan line adjustments. That does not exist right now, by the way, but it seems possible, which is really interesting. So this could be implemented in any sort of LCD, but that's the one rub there, right? I say LCD because currently, obviously, this is driven by complex backlight strobing technology, and OLEDs do not have a backlight. They are self-illuminated pixels, so this does not apply to OLED currently. And that is why this creates an interesting sort of situation. So in my current setup, I have my large OLED monitor front and center, but on the side I always have my secondary monitor that I can use for certain types of games, testing or whatever. I've mounted the Pulsar monitor over there. It is actually part of that setup now. I have this as like a daily driver in my current setup because it is one that it serves its purpose for productivity, but there's certain types of content that even as an LCD, with all the caveats that entails, the results of the motion clarity are so good that I would switch to this monitor to use it. And I'm someone that very much dislikes LCDs. I don't like the way they look in so many situations, but in this case, like, they absolutely crushed it in terms of just solving this long-standing problem. If you're playing a side-scrolling action game on this display, you're going to get just unbelievable levels of clarity that you haven't seen since using a CRT. And seeing modern PC games run this way is really astounding to me. And so I actually recommend, so I mentioned this here, is one of the games, or actually a couple, stuff like Freedom Planet 2, the recent Shinobi Art of Vengeance, games like this actually support higher frame rates. I seriously recommend playing those on a monitor like this just to see what it does, because I think it's actually far more effective than tests like Valorant or whatever else that you typically see, CSGO. Like, those are the popular games, but the benefits when you see a side-scrolling game moving at that speed with this fluidity and motion clarity, it's really unbelievable. So
yeah, I mean, it's been quite interesting to make this a discussion-based video, because it's kind of like one of these situations where the display technology is so alien to what the user is likely to be watching this video on, that actually being able to capture that experience and show it is very, very difficult.
Yes.
So it is basically almost like a testimony as opposed to like a show and tell, so to speak.
Exactly. Some labs, some studios do actually have things like the Blurbusters tracking camera setup. They actually have a full like setup to handle display testing. We don't have that. We work out of our house. So, but I feel like I do have the testing in my eyes, because I know what this looks like and I know what I've been missing for so long. And as a result, I can testify that it actually does work. And one of the key things here actually is the fact that it just works, as Jensen would say.
Yeah.
And this is very, very important, right? Because even on, like, say, I use black frame insertion on my OLED TV back there, right? But to use it actually requires you to jump through steps to enable it. You cannot have VRR on. You can't have ultra low latency mode enabled. You've got to very specifically go into the menu, turn it on. It only works with 60 hertz content. There's a bunch of limitations there. And it was the same with strobing on monitors, right? If you wanted to load up a game and you're like, all right, 120 hertz strobe, let's go. You got to lock it at 120. You've got to dial in your game settings in order to actually hit that refresh rate. Like, there was just so many things in the way, and the convenience of VRR sort of took over it. That ultra low motion blur features just kind of went away. This works in a way that you don't actually have to do anything. You just turn on Pulsar. You can't even tell it's on the Windows desktop. Like, there's no flicker. It's brighter when enabled than not enabled, due to that compensation cycle. So you actually just want to leave it on all the time. And then it just works in the game. You load up the game, the frame rate can be whatever. It's normal G-Sync compatibility. So no matter your frame rate, you don't have to dial in specific settings to lock it down. It just works exactly as it should. And in the current firmware, like I said, when it drops out of the range, it just switches back to normal mode. So even without that firmware update that's coming soon, it's still an extremely seamless experience. The only caveat here, and it kind of makes sense at the moment, but we'll see if it ever changes, is that it does require an Nvidia GPU with drivers from Pulsar forward, right? So this is not something you can use on any other GPU. You can't use it on, as far as I know, other computer systems currently, like Mac OS, for instance. It's not going to work there. This is something that is currently designed to work with NVIDIA cards on a Windows PC, which it would be cool if in the future there was a way to support it on arbitrary devices, or at least be able to utilize the ultra low motion blur aspect. Like I could imagine plugging this into, say, a RetroTink 4K, right? And then you have like this 27-inch widescreen CRT in terms of motion clarity, which would just be nuts. So that stuff's all really cool. Just for note, I am actually testing the Asus ROG version. I don't know if I did a proper ROG there, but it's
acceptable.
Okay. But it's not so much a monitor review, but the monitor itself has been excellent in this regard. The one limitation, of course, that really stands out is that, again, as an LCD, even though this is broken up into backlight zones, it is not designed to work like local dimmed style LCDs, because the backlight dimming or pulsing function specifically is utilizing that already. So you can't dim it selectively to get different zones to appear differently, which means that you don't get anything with improved black levels. It is just...
What about HDR?
HDR is supported. The monitor is bright, but because it is a singular, well, it's a slivered backlight, if you will, and it's not designed to sort of like accentuate brightness and darkness, it looks like a full backlight LCD running HDR. So it is bright, I will say. It just, you can't get that contrast and depth that you need for a really convincing HDR presentation. So I'm not necessarily sure that I would recommend HDR in this case, but at least it's bright enough, which is good. So,
I mean, this is fascinating stuff. I mean, I think it was in 2013 that Nvidia basically changed the game with displays with G-Sync. I mean, prior to that, it was basically a trade-off between having to have an absolutely locked frame rate with V-Sync engaged, V-Sync judder if there were dropped frames, or tearing. It was just not a particularly great experience. G-Sync effectively solved that, but it, still a flat panel display, still had all of those issues with motion clarity, and it's taken some time, I guess, 13 years. But here we are with what looks like a pretty viable solution to that. Doesn't sound like every single aspect of display deficiencies has been addressed, but in terms of like one of the key issues with flat panels over the last few years, it kind of has been, and this is like super important, right?
Exactly. And my hope here is that G-Sync had a tremendous influence on displays after its release, and now VRR and everything is part of the HDMI standard. It's perhaps not as robust as G-Sync itself, but everyone sort of locked onto this feature, and you started to see it implemented at scale. And now it's just a standard part of any display. That's what I'm hoping we see here. When a company like Nvidia tackles a problem like this, their work, I think, is very influential and important. And in this case, I really encourage display developers, companies, to look at what they've done here and consider it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some very early prototype displays. I think you saw them too at a couple of events, but I haven't seen the final thing yet, so I'm really looking forward to checking that out. But thanks for that. It's been fascinating stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, Rich. And I really can't stress enough how much of a game changer this is. So if you're really interested in motion clarity on a display, and you followed my thoughts on CRTs over the years, you need to see a Pulsar display for yourself.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thanks for that, John. Well, I guess that's all we've got to say about this one, right? So just enough time to say thanks for checking that out. And thanks for watching this video. And we'll have a lot more on various technologies that have emerged from CES going forward. But that's all from us for now. Please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/digitalfoundry. But that's all from us. We'll see you soon. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.